From LPM,
Louisville Public Media.
Support for this podcast comes from Vision Zero. On foot or behind the wheel, safety is a shared responsibility. And Vision Zero Louisville believes 0 roadway fatalities is the only acceptable amount. Their mission is to foster a community where everyone can safely reach their destination, no matter how they get there. More at visionzerolouisville.org.
You're listening to Where Y'all Really From. This is Charlene Buckles, a proud Filipina Kentuckian. In the studio with me today, we have Kaili Moss. Hi, Kaili.
Hey, Charlene.
Kaili, I like to start every episode asking our guests, where are you from? And where are you really from?
Okay, so easy question. So I'm from Stafford, Virginia, and where I'm really from is I'm first generation. I am Black and Japanese. My dad is from somewhere in northern Florida, and my mom is from Ishikawa, Okinawa, and she spent the first 14 years of her life there until she moved to the United States. And my mom, probably when she hears this, she'll say, like, why did you say you were Black and Japanese? You're Black and Okinawan. And that distinction's important to my mom and my grandma because if you consider the history of Okinawa, they were their own independent kingdom until 1872. And then it was later returned to Japan's sovereignty in 1972, which was a year after my mother was born. And so for her and my grandma, they identify very strongly and specifically as Okinawan. So I'm Black Japanese, Black Okinawan.
And I know people can't see this at home, but you are you're Asian Black, and you're presenting as a Black woman. But you grew up with a lot of like the Asian traditions, having your mom, raise you and things like that. So what was it like growing up, with Asian traditions, an Asian mom, and presenting Black?
Right. So, yes, exactly. I grew up with Asian traditions and cultures, but I am perceived as a Black woman. And so it's been really hard, I think, and confusing for some people to grasp that. And maybe perhaps it's made it difficult for people to relate to me because of maybe assumptions that they make about me based off of my appearance and not knowing like my full heritage. So I just think about like growing up and the type of food that I would eat at home or like what I would bring for lunch, or when my friends would come over, they would have to take off their shoes. It was like automatic for me. And they're like, oh, wait, I have to take off my shoes. And I'm like, yeah, like, doesn't everybody take off their shoes? And it's funny because my Nana would say stuff like, why do Americans, wear shoes in their house, but they're barefoot outside? Like, yeah. So, I mean, things like that. Or, my family were very spiritual. That's our Okinawan tradition. And so, like, the really weird, quirky superstitions I grew up with, like, you don't stab your food, or like when you're washing rice, make sure no rice falls into the sink or you'll starve, or like a house shouldn't be on a main street, and fours, and just all these like really quirky superstitions, right? But I, again, am perceived as a Black woman. Even I think just being with my family, my grandmother in particular, like she would oftentimes pick me up from school because my mom would be working. And I know like days, my teachers or people would see my mom pick me up one day and she looks a certain way. And then my grandma would pick me up and they would be like, who's this older lady that's like watching you? I'm like, oh, this is my Nana. And so I think it was just really confusing, and people really didn't know how to sort me. And so it made it really difficult, I think I struggled with feeling like I belonged in both groups. I think as a Black person, I was just too weird. Like I didn't necessarily grow up knowing a whole lot about my Black identity, and just like not understanding certain cultural references or whatever. Because again, my mom came to the United States when she was 14, and my dad wasn't really around growing up until I was adopted much later by my stepfather, my dad, who raised me. But I didn't grow up with a really strong sense of Black identity. And so I think some of my Black classmates were like, your name is Kaili, and the way you talk and what you eat, and just like, it, there's that. And then with Asian people, I was never seen as in group because I was too Black. It's like, it didn't matter that like, oh, like you talk to your ancestors too, or like you have similar, superstitions and things like that. It was just like that, in addition to the fact that I didn't speak the language. Like, and I think when you think about people and how they identify, and sometimes how your physical environment maybe shapes the way you see yourself, when we think about a lot of Black Americans, for example, some of us don't know our heritage. We don't have the luxury of knowing where our ancestors came from, because many of us our ancestors were forcibly brought to this country. And so, when people say like, you're an African American, and I don't identify with the continent of Africa. That's a whole myriad of countries. Like, unlike my mom, who, her nationality, she's from Japan. She's specifically from Ishikawa and Okinawa. Like, her being being overseas in Japan for 14 years, that very much shaped a lot of her identity. She spoke the language. So though she looked American, she had tan skin, and Okinawans are typically tan. I mean, I come from farmers, and she had this brown curly hair. She was more readily accepted. She looked different. She was clearly American. I mean, she was called Ainoko, which is a love child because of the U.S. occupation. My grandfather and my father's in the military, so there was that, and she was teased for that. But she spoke the language. So then I'm first-generation American. I'm here in this country, and I'm with other Asian people who are like, who's this girl? this brown girl with frizzy Black hair, and this nose and my eyes, whatever. Like, I think they're almondy, whatever, just these phenotypical traits that Asian people have. So I think it was difficult, to answer your question, having these traditions and having this heritage and cultural connection, but then having to substantiate and almost like having my Asian heritage and even my Blackness was very much policed, and there was a lot of gatekeeping.
That's so interesting. And we've had a lot of, like, in our podcast who've talked about living in that third space where you're really not considered, Asian fully, or you're not considered American fully, and in your case, Black fully. And now that you live here in Louisville, like you've been here now for about a year or so, and like you really have immersed yourself in this community, how do you navigate that third space as an adult?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure if I do, and I don't know if I do it well. Because when I meet new people, I've stopped identifying as Black and Japanese just because of how much skepticism and rejection that I'm usually met with. But then I feel like compelled. It's almost like a knee-jerk reaction when people like wrongfully or incorrectly assume that I'm white because they're like, oh, you must have a white parent. I'm like, no, I'm not. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that's not my heritage. But I've just have always felt the need to have to like prove, because I was tested, like say something in Japanese or like show me a picture of this person, just to avoid all that, because it's exhausting. As you pointed out, like I navigate this world as a Black woman, and I'm perceived readily as a Black woman. And so having to do this sort of like identity substantiation, it's exhausting. And, my grandma was the first person who made me aware that I do this. And she asked me one time, like, Kaili, why do you always say you're a Black girl? Like, you're not just Black. Like, you're Black, but you're Okinawan too. Like, are you embarrassed of me? Are you not proud of me? And yeah, and it was, I just remember feeling like really ashamed because I could sense that she was hurt. But I tried to also explain to her, like, what my life is like navigating as someone who's perceived as Black in America. But it doesn't change how proud I feel about where my mother is from or who my grandmother is and who I am. See how I kind of like went outside myself, but that's who I am. And it's not that I'm not proud of my heritage. It's just really tough sometimes because, I mean, unless I feel embraced and I feel safe, like there is this gatekeeping and this skepticism and this rejection. And that's really my history. I mean, growing up in America as a biracial person, being one of the few, if not the only Black minority person in my classroom, I dreaded the World War II unit where, like, they would say really dumb shit about Japan. And, like, that's when I was Japanese. It was a time to alienate me and to other me. And then, you know, the unit of slavery. Again, it's just, like, it just compounds. And so, like, I think today what I try to remember is that my culture is mine, and it's mine to share and to embrace and celebrate. These traditions that my family observed growing up, I will pass them down to my children. And the love and the acceptance of my grandmother, my mom, and my family in Okinawa, like, that's enough. So all of that to say that it's something that I'm trying to be more intentional about. And because authenticity is, like, a really important virtue to me. And I feel like I've muted that aspect of myself being part Japanese. And there are times where there's tension between those identities, like conversations, or I would even argue that the lack of conversation around anti-Asian sentiment today, violence, the 2021 Atlanta shootings. There's tension there because, you know, there's this uprising, I would say a continual uprising, the movement for racial justice. And what we see, and I get nervous when I talk about this because I have people in my own community and they pause and they're like, what are you talking about? And, like, I think what's important to recognize before I say what I'm about to say is that, like, multiple realities and truths can be held, and it's not about diminishing or like making, you know, any sort of, there is, what I'm trying to say is that many people can hold multiple truths and multiple things can be true at one time. And so when I see our elders, people that look like my Nana, and they're randomly being attacked on subways in public, you know, my grandma doesn't speak English very well. And so she speaks in Hogan, which is the language my mom and her use to talk to each other. And, like, with COVID and everything and just the ugliness and the hatred you see in the media, that could easily be her. And having people dismiss that experience when it very much touches on my life intimately. You know, I'm also a Black person, and with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, and all the countless victims of police violence, you know, like, that's true, and that impacts me the same. And you see that it impacts me in one way, and you don't see how other racial justice issues impact me in other ways. And so there's, like, this erasure of experience and invalidation of, you know, stop Asian hate. Like, what are you talking about? Where are Asian people when it comes to the Black Lives Matter movement? And I think that's a valid criticism because anti-Blackness exists in the Asian community. And it's global. It's not just the Asian community. And I've experienced that firsthand as someone who is part Asian. And so for people acting in bad faith, I think it's an opportunity to perpetuate stereotypes about Black criminality, right? And then you have all this death and pain caused by police towards Black people, all this violence. And it's like, well, see, you know, they're harming Asian, you know, they're beating up and it's like a really sick, racist fallacy that's created by white supremacy.
Exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. Because, you know, one, you have a lot of, particularly in a place that is predominantly white, they want to pigeonhole us and oftentimes erase our experience, like you were saying. And so, like, a part of, I think, what you were saying, too, is, like, reclaiming that space. And that's one aspect of a lot of the things that we're dealing with is that external, like, white supremacist culture and trying to break down those, like, barriers, but then another part of it, or not barriers, or even just like reclaiming like a space in that and just trying to break that down. But then also the barriers that white supremacy has put within various racial groups, and like all those different ways in which like we're fighting against each other. And like there is this belief that, I don't know what it is, but like that there's only space for one of us, that there's only space for one person at this table. And that's, at one point it's Breonna Taylor. At one point it's API. At one point it's, trans Kentuckians or LGBTQ. But the reality is that we could all be at this table at the same time. We could all hold our truths, like you were saying, holding multiple truths at the same time, because those are all of our experience. We can't be just one-dimensional.
Right.
And I think in a state like Kentucky, it's even more important because there's so few of us. Like there's so few API.
Right.
There's so few Black Kentuckians, especially outside of Louisville.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to band together because they can't ignore us when there's so many.
Right. Yeah, it's the scarcity mindset that white supremacy and capitalism creates that make people not want to empathize and stand in solidarity with, people who are similarly situated. And, I'm very intimately aware and know of my history of, being a descendant of people who were enslaved. And then also as someone who is Japanese and my mother's from Japan, my grandmother from Japan as well, like there is a very well documented history of exclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And exploitation, economic exploitation of Asian workers and women specifically. And so no one's saying that anybody's struggles or experiences are necessarily the same or equal, but there are a lot of parallels. And I think that there's space for multiple stories. And so I really appreciate what you said. It really is, there's not many of us. And I think coming to the table and being open to listen and have people share, I think there's a lot of opportunity for coalition building and working together on these issues. And there's been historically many Asian American activists who have contributed to the civil rights movement that, that's really important to recognize. And it's just, again, just going back to my personal experience, I think a recent example of those two, my two heritages that are distinct clashing looks like that. I have, so we talked a little bit about anti-Blackness in the Black, or not, excuse me. Yes, there is anti-Blackness even in the Black community, but specifically rampant anti-Blackness in the Asian community and classism and it's colorism as well. That's another issue that's unique to our community, with my mom and grandma being Tanner Asian people, being from Okinawa, which is a very beautiful island. They spend a lot of time outdoors, but there's that. Even my grandma used to tell me, like, her mother was really wealthy and she was a city girl and she lived in Tokyo, I think. She was very porcelain and pale because she didn't labor outside. And so that was a marker of class. But I think about growing up and, with my Black friends and people kind of saying the same old things that my mom heard growing up in America, like chink. And if that needs to be cut, I understand if that's, but just stuff like that, being called, racial epithets, ching, ching, chong, really stupid stuff. Do you guys eat dogs? Like, and when COVID happened, I recall we were planning a trip. It was right after I graduated from law school, and we were supposed to be going on a trip. And me being kind of like the voice of reason in my friend group, I'm like, y'all, we might need to cancel this trip because I don't know what the hell this coronavirus is, but I'm not trying to be on it was supposed to be a cruise to the Bahamas. I'm like, that's a floating petri dish, right? And one of my friend's friends said, those like Chinese, Japanese, whatever, dirty knees, whatever, that stupid song that some of us have heard growing up. She said something like really racist and terrible, and I just paused, and my best friend's like, Kylie's Asian, right? And she's like, girl, I be forgetting. And I'm like, no, it's this casual racism that people participate in, and these stereotypes. And just not being in community with other people. And so it's been tough on both sides. And the reality is a lot of my experience with racism has been shaped by how I look and perceived as a Black person. But kind of like when people make digs about LGBT people, those identities, and I guess saying that my Asian identity is invisible, I would say it's not readily discernible. Maybe it's about perception. People don't know that they're hurting me and harming me.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more about the intersectionality of being Black, Okinawan, and queer. You're listening to Where Y'all Really From?
Support for LPM podcasts comes from the Eye Care Institute and Butchertown Clinical Trials, where they strive for diversity, equity, and inclusion within their staff, patients, and clinical trial participants. To learn more, visit butchertown.clinic.
Your mornings are busy, and finding the time to stay up to date on what's happening in Louisville and southern Indiana isn't easy. I'm Bill Burton. Join me to stay informed on your terms each weekday with the LPM Daily News Briefing, the news you need to start your day. From Louisville Public Media. See you in the morning.
Welcome back to Where Y'all Really From? I'm Charlene Buckles, and my guest today is civil rights attorney Kaili Moss. We talked about, carrying multitudes of not just race, but these other identities that we hold. And correct me if I'm wrong, we've identified as a queer or LGBTQ. Which one do you identify with?
I really appreciate your thoughtfulness in asking that question because I think it depends on the person. I would say that I identify as a queer bisexual woman, and that is within the umbrella of LGBTQ. I understand that there's some trepidation with people using the word queer growing up. I think when my mother was growing up, specifically like older generations, our parents, that word was considered a slur, which is a really ugly word to tease and torment, gay people. But since my generation, I guess, has reclaimed that word. And so I think when it comes to identity, and I think this is very much on topic with what we've talked about thus far, respecting people's right to self-identify. Mm-hmm. And so I say all that to say thank you for asking me. I identify as a queer woman.
Yeah, and so I wanted to ask a little bit about that, of that other dynamic and holding space for your families who are very traditional, if we say, and so they have a lot of these various notions. And a part of that sometimes is that model minority mindset of don't rock the boat. I don't want to, we don't want to be out there and put ourselves out there often. And they are sometimes very classist and sometimes very racist against other cultures, but then also can be very anti-gay and anti-queer. So how was that experience coming out to an Asian mom and having those types of discussions with her?
So it was definitely a process and something that evolved over time. I would say when I first told my mom, I guess she was supportive. I mean, she didn't kick me out of the house, but by then I was already in law school and living on my own and pretty independent. Deep down, I don't think she was too thrilled. And that's not to say that she had any sort of moral objection to homosexuality, despite being Catholic. And that's a whole other podcast episode. But I think that for her, and what she told me, is that she needed some time to adjust and mourn the version of myself that she thought I was, mourn her daughter, the version of her daughter she created. And I told her it was really that she needed to mourn the expectations that she had for me. And that specifically would be this traditional cookie cutter heterosexual version of my life. And I think a lot of first generation kids and having an immigrant parent, you are subject to these really high expectations simply because of the same reasons that brought your parents here in the first place. They, want you to have a better life and access to better opportunities. And so, like, I think about my mom and my grandmother, and they're the two smartest, most wise women I know, wisest women. And they worked in the service industry. My mom worked at multiple restaurants, and my grandma worked in those same restaurants, and she also did catering. And I think, in addition to just being so smart, and like, had they had different life circumstances or options, they would have been the best in their fields. But they worked really hard, and something that I grew up with was this very strong emphasis on education. My mom put me in private school. She made really good tips. She worked on base. We have a strong military connection in my family, so she made really good money hourly, and then she had tips. And then she also lived with my grandparents and my grandfather, and so there was a lot of support. And so I was able to go to private school. That was really important to my mom. I also have a late birthday, and she wanted me to start school when I was actually ready, and that's when I was 4. So there was like this cutoff about like if your birthday is after September, whatever. Anyway, it doesn't matter. That's how I ended up in private school. But in addition to being in private school, my mom put me in sports. I'm woefully unathletic after school activities. And so she really emphasized this idea of hard work and excellence. And she used to say silly stuff like, you're not a Bijan, you're an Asian. So you need to, work really hard in school. And she was just the quintessential tiger mom. And I don't think that wasn't always a good thing. At times it was harmful. But I know my mom tried to give me the best of everything because she thought I deserved the best of everything. But more importantly, she gave me the best version of herself. Yeah. Yeah, she gave me the best gift, and that was the best version of herself. And I really appreciate her and my grandma and just everyone who's gotten me to where I am today. I'm so thankful.
So did she then feel like when you came out that that she really needed to change the various expectations, or like this image of this vision that you were, what did she, I guess my question is, like, what was her expectation? Like, what did she think?
I think she wanted me, my mom's expectations were shaped by what she knew and what she grew up seeing. And so I am the only queer person that I know of in my family, right? And, it's a really beautiful thing to think about because, like, although I have queered my family's narrative, literally, and I'm different, my grandma was different, too, in that regard because she married a Black man. And coming from Okinawa, she met, my mom was born in 1971. And we already talked about anti-Blackness in Asian communities. So when she met my mom's dad, I'm sure her folks weren't happy, right? And, one thing I will say, if I can be honest, my grandma was less supportive when I came out as queer. It was like a combination of a lot of things. I am very open on social media. I'm very open about who I am, very outspoken, and I try to be very authentic. And my mom saw this, and she's like, you haven't come out to your grandma yet, but you're like posting all this stuff on Facebook, and like, don't you owe it to her to like tell her? And I'm like, I don't know anybody anything. I come out when I feel safe and I'm ready. But the truth was, I wasn't ready to talk to my grandma because I didn't think she would be supportive or accept me. And initially she didn't. She was just like, yeah, I'm not going to pretend like I'm happy about this. Like, I know such and such a son, he didn't get married for a long time, and he's like that too. Like, but that's okay because he's not my he's not my grandchild, but you're smart. Like, you're a lawyer. Like, all these traditional good things, I guess, that you would want for your child. But like, why? Why would you make your life harder? Like, and it was hard. And I spoke with my therapist about it, and I needed some time because it was harmful, obviously, to me. It was really hurtful. And it's, telling random strangers or whatever. Like, I don't care how you feel, like, whatever. Like, but my grandma, who was literally, you know, she helped raise me, her opinion meant a lot to me. And I think that's why I was scared to, like, tell her. But, you know, she is now very supportive, because my mom had to kind of meet her where she was at and break it down to her in her terms. Like, you know, why'd you pick Dad? And she's like, what do you mean? And she's like, did you pick him because he was Black? She's like, no, I liked him. I thought, you know, he was handsome, and I like to dance and he liked to dance, and we both like Motown and we like different things. And she's like, that's how Kaili is. She doesn't pick she just loves who she loves, like how you loved who you loved, and how your family felt and how they were worried about what other people would say. Like, everything was fine. And so the way that you were, Kaili's like that in a different way. So it kind of comes full circle in a way.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think my mom is proud of me, not just for existing how I am, but, like, you know, instead of meeting her expectations, perhaps I surpassed her expectations in a positive way. And, you know, I think everything's going to be okay. And I think that hopefully just me being who I am, you know, makes others feel safe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's absolutely it. When you shine in your light, that gives others permission to shine in their light. And just in the way that your grandmother built this road for you to be who you are unapologetically and love who you are unapologetically, you're doing the same for your future generations, you know? So thank you for sharing your story.
I love how you put a bow on that. That was really beautiful.
Well, so I wanted to, of course, we could talk all day and for hours on end, but we only have about, a little bit of time. And so I wanted to do our traditional lightning round questions.
Okay.
And I did see you post on social media about one of these questions.
Because I didn't know what to say.
Okay, so let's start. What is your superpower?
Okay, this was probably the hardest question because, I don't know how to answer it. And it's hard to talk about yourself in this way. I think it's easier to be self-deprecating. So I had to ask a few people, what do you think my superpower is? And I got really beautiful responses. I think the one that resonates with me is, a lot of people say they're a consensus builder. But I think that what I do fairly well is I think that I'm okay with putting an idea out there and, regardless of whether or not it's popular, I'm committed. I have a moral and personal commitment to speaking the truth and my truth. And so I think instead of being a consensus builder, I'm a consensus molder. And I think that I have the ability because I think I can have productive conversations with people I disagree with and get them to see, give the best case of whatever the issue is. And whether or not they walk away agreeing with me or not, it's an idea that I've exposed them to. And I'd like to think that I have the influence to at least help mold consensus versus just, getting a whole bunch of people that agree with me together. And so I think that is a superpower. It helps as far as what I do for a living, being an attorney.
I was going to say, and then enter Kaili Moss, JD.
So I think that might be my superpower, being a consensus molder. And I think sometimes that doesn't always mean following what's popular and what the masses are saying, but it's adding kind of this idea into the marketplace of ideas and trying to kind of shape conversations and movements. I think that might be it.
Love it. So what is your favorite song to jam to right now?
I listen to a lot of older music. I really love anything Earth, Wind, and Fire. Love it. If anyone ever listens to the song September and you actually look at the lyrics, they're pretty beautiful. I don't know. It's just such a celebratory song. And I know it's a song about a fall month, but it just makes me feel happy all year round. It's such a good song. But I love Earth, Wind, and Fire. That's my go-to jam group.
I love that. And we also have our shared Atlanta driving
yes.
from early 2000s. What is your comfort food?
I know people are going to gag when I say this, but Spam, egg, and rice. It's the best.
I love spam, egg, and rice. Are you kidding? That's
Yes,
amazing.
It's my favorite. It's so, so good. And my mom lived in Hawaii. So, like, apparently if you go to, like, a McDonald's, there's, like, Spam musubi. And, like, yeah, so the people who get it, and those who don't. So.
And I don't really care for the people that don't. Now, like, people that you get, you're like, yes.
You're good people.
Yes, you're good people. I love it. That was, like, the staple in my house, the Spam, egg, and rice. And, like, you, scramble the egg and you dip the Spam in it. And, yep.
Yeah.
I'm here. I'm right here with you. And then last question, what is the most Kentucky thing that you do?
That's the one I couldn't come up with an answer to without being a cliche. So I can answer. So I'm from Virginia, as I said before. And I think there's some similarities. Like we say y'all. I always order sweet tea when I go to a restaurant. I think specific to Louisville, aside from, like, it took me forever to, like, rehearse how to say it right instead of saying Louisville or whatever. I love participating in Twitter discourse about, like, neighborhoods, best place to hang out, like, good restaurants in the city. Like, I don't know, there's some weird territorial, like, I don't know. I think that's a lot of fun, and I notice a lot of people here, like, do that.
They do, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess those are the things that make me, I don't know, a Kentuckian.
Yes, absolutely.
By choice.
By choice. I mean, you moved here by choice. I love it. Okay, well, thank you so much, Kaili. It's been such a beautiful conversation. I love everything that you've shared. Many moments for having tears in my eyes. And, like, it's always been, like, such a therapeutic experience being in the studio and, like, recording this podcast, and so I really appreciate your vulnerability and sharing your story with us today.
Thank you. And I just want to say that meeting you, I don't think you knew this at the time, but you were one of the first people to actually see me in my totality. And I just want to thank you for that.
Oh my gosh. Here.
I've always felt in group with you, and you've always made me feel good about showing up. And like how you said, when you're yourself, you give people the permission to shine and do them. And that's exactly what you've done for me. And I just wanted to say thank you so much. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you. I'm trying now. Thanks to Kaili for being with us today, and thanks to you for listening. I'm Charlene Buckles, and this is Where Y'all Really From?
Where Y'all Really From is created and produced by Dan Wu, Charlene Buckles, May Suramek, and me, Nima Kulkarni. Our executive producer is Laura Ellis. Our associate producer is Alex Biscardi. Kojin Tashiro wrote our theme song, and Leanne Gann created our logo. Where Y'all Really From is part of the Louisville Public Media Podcast Incubator, with support from the Eye Care Institute's Butchertown Clinical Trials. Our Lexington interviews are recorded at Radio Lex with engineering and assistance by Mark Royce. For more information and to keep in touch, visit whereyallreallyfrom.org.
Support for this podcast comes from Vision Zero. On foot or behind the wheel, safety is a shared responsibility. And Vision Zero Louisville believes 0 roadway fatalities is the only acceptable amount. Their mission is to foster a community where everyone can safely reach their destination, no matter how they get there. More at visionzerolouisville.org.
Next time on In Conversation, preparing for legal sports betting in Kentucky and eventually legalized medical marijuana. Join us for In Conversation Friday morning at 11 on 89.3 WFPL at lpm.org or wherever you get your podcasts.